Okay, so today we're going to be learning about the cell, and the cell is what our bodies are made up of, thousands of them, and they are essential for life. In all organisms have cells. So we're going to learn about the structure of a cell and what's inside the cell today. So inside the cell, the main thing is this jelly-like material, which we call cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm contains lots of nutrients and salts inside this jelly, in which all these organelles, which are like these mini organs, we can call them, sit. So all these organelles have different functions that make the cell operate in the best way possible. So, and they all sit in this jelly called the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is also where we have lots of chemical reactions occurring within the cell, which we'll learn about later on in biology, which is very cool. And so, one of the organelles inside the cell is called the nucleus. The nucleus contains our genes, which is stored in something called DNA, which is a long strand which has the code for how we are as human beings. So everything that you look like, the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, is all stored inside this long chain of DNA. And this DNA is all wrapped up tightly inside your nucleus. And your nucleus has got this membrane bound organelle, we call it, with all our DNA inside. And we'll learn about how later on how our DNA, when we copy it, we can make into proteins which make us the person we are. So it's like the manual for me, Gabriella, my DNA. Now, the next organelle we're going to learn about is our cell membrane. Our cell membrane is this layer that separates the cytoplasm from the outside, from the rest of the world. So if we have a blood vessel, we're going to have the cytoplasm, which separates the cells from the fluid around the cells, for example. And the very cool thing, this membrane is very, very specialized, and it's called partially permeable, which means it lets some things in and some things not in. So some chemicals can enter the cell and some can't, and the cell membrane gets to pick what can come in and what can't come in, which is really cool. And it's a very important word that we remember, that it's partially permeable. So partially some things can come in and some things can't. And it's very specialized and intricate. Now we have the mitochondria. Many of you would have heard this called as the powerhouse of the cell. And it's really important because it makes energy for our bodies. Every time we run, we walk, we talk, we blink, we need energy. And how do we make energy? Energy is made inside the mitochondria, which is really important. And the process of making energy is something called respiration, which is what occurs inside the mitochondria, inside the yellow bit, is where respiration occurs. And so respiration needs oxygen and it needs sugar, which is what we eat, and that turns it into energy. And then we breathe out carbon dioxide, and water is released, which we urinate out, which is amazing. And mitochondria is very, very essential. So some cells will have more mitochondria than others. For example, a muscle cell has loads of mitochondria because, as you can imagine, our muscle cells needs lots and lots of energy. So often we can see by the amount of mitochondria within a cell how active the cell is. Now we've done all the important organelles that are part of an animal cell or a human cell. And so those are the all important organelles that are essential for that. There's a few more, but we won't be learning about them today. But the important organelles for plants, they've got a few extra. So they've got 3 more organelles that they need to survive. For example, all plant cells have something called a cell wall. So we've learned about the cell membrane, which is the thin layer that separates the cell from the outside. But plants have something called a cell wall, which is made of cellulose, which is a carbohydrate. And it's this wall that strengthens the cell so it makes it strong and it supports it so it can't be bashed around. and so forth. So strengthens and supports, and anything can come through that carbohydrate cellulose wall. So water can come through, that's not a problem for that. So our animal cells and our human cells, we don't have cell walls because sometimes we need our cells to be a bit more moldable, like blood cells. They have to fit through really, really tiny gaps in our capillaries. And so they want to be able to be flexible. We don't want a cell wall for them. Next, we have the vacuole. The vacuole is like this sac filled with water and cell sap, which is found in plant cells. And they keep the cell turgid, which means it stops the cell from bursting when it's so full of water. So the vacuole will swell and it will stop more water coming in to the cell. So we can see here on our slide that this blue area is our vacuole, which fills with water when there's lots of water, and when there's not a lot of water, then water will come out of that vacuole by osmosis and move out of the cell. We'll learn about osmosis further on down. And last but very not least, we have the chloroplasts in plant cells. Chloroplasts are essential for all plant cells to do photosynthesis, which is the process of turning light into food. So humans, we eat food and then we use our energy, whereas plants use light to make their food, and then that food that they've made, they can turn into energy. And so chloroplasts have a very essential pigment inside them called chlorophyll. And this is a green pigment. It's what makes our leaves green. And this green pigment absorbs the light and makes the food. So that's why all the trees outside are all green, because they contain chlorophyll to make food. Absorb the light and to make food inside the chloroplast. And so that is the organelles that you need to know for GCSE of a cell. And so just to review, here are some parts of a plant cell, and we're going to go through them to identify them. So this brown thing here, we can see it's a bit wiggly. This is a mitochondria, which is where we make our energy. Then this here is the cell wall of the plant cell. Actually it's pointing to the cell membrane, because we can see this inner line is the cell membrane. So plant cells also have a cell membrane and a cell wall. And this arrow here is pointing to the cell wall, which is made of cellulose. And then right here we can see this is our vacuole, because it's large, the sac that contains the water and the sap, which supports the cell when it's really full of water and stops it from bursting. And when there's not a lot of water, it will decrease in size and go back to being small when the plant is more dehydrated. This arrow here is pointing to the cytoplasm, which is the jelly inside the cell where all these organelles get to sit and all these different chemical reactions may occur. And yeah, here we have chloroplasts, which contain our chlorophyll for photosynthesis. So these are the important parts of the cell and the different organelles to remember.